Hyperpolyglot activist, learn languages, make a difference. My name is Dr. Carlos Diebro Lopez, and today we're going to tackle the second episode of a critical history of Spanish. So as you can see in the screen, this video series features 3 episodes. Last week we saw the first episode, the colonial engineering of modern Spanish as a North Atlantic universal. If you missed that episode, click on the link above and get back to this video. Now, without further ado, let's begin with the second episode, Post-Colonial Spanish and its Linguistic Ideologies, from Pan-Hispanism to Hispanofonía. Now, first things first, what is post-colonial Spanish? Well, as you can see on the screen, post-colonial Spanish is best understood as the Spanish spoken across the globe after Spain's loss of its colonies. Now, it is a bit of a misnomer because Spain still preserves some of its colonies. So post-colonial Spanish, strictly speaking, has never existed. But when we say post-colonial Spanish, we mean the Spanish spoken after Spain has lost most of its colonies. And in that regard, it is particularly important the collapse of the Spanish Empire in the 19th century, where Spain lost all of its colonies in Latin America. So Spanish scholars, as a result of this collapse, engaged in a national reflection on the value of Spain's relationship vis-a-vis other Spanish-speaking countries. So the idea is that Spain loses a strong part of its identity, and as a result, it enters a crisis and gets to reflect on its own national consciousness, and gets to really dig deep into what is Spain, who belongs to Spain, and where is Spain headed. So there is a key transition between Spanish colonialism up to the 19th century, meaning there are certain territories that belong to Spain, and those territories are colonies, to Spanish coloniality, meaning the logics and legacies of colonialism. After the independence of those territories that used to belong to Spain, something remains which connects the old metropole to the old colonies, which is a cultural rapport, a cultural link. The fact that all of these territories still speak the same language and share a lot of traditions and customs. So from that perspective, we go from Spanish colonialism to Spanish coloniality. And then second, what are linguistic ideologies? Well, language ideologies are just the ways in which we conceptualize languages, speakers, and discursive practices. In this case, how do we conceptualize Spanish as it is spoken in the Iberian Peninsula vis-a-vis other parts of the world? Like other kinds of ideologies, language ideologies are pervaded with political and moral interests and are shaped in a cultural setting. So language ideologies are not neutral. Rather, they obey to political and social interests, but those are disguised under the facade of culture. So to study language ideologies means to explore the nexus of language, culture, and politics. Let's see how that plays out in the context of Spanish as a quote-unquote global language after the 19th century. After the political collapse of the Spanish Empire, there is a quote-unquote common culture that cuts across both Spain and its former colonies, and that allows nationalists from Spain to target Spanish-speaking countries worldwide for cultural and economic purposes. And this exercise is contingent upon 2 main linguistic ideologies, Pan-Hispanism and Hispanofonía. So what is Pan-Hispanism? Well, it's a linguistic ideology that begins in the 19th century and whose proponents seek to legitimize the ascendancy of the Peninsular Spanish Royal Academy over Spain's former American colonies. So this ideology seeks to maintain a hierarchical relationship with Spain's former colonies, according to which peninsular Spanish would be superior to Spanish as it is spoken worldwide, so that those type of Spanishes will have a relationship of dependence and submission vis-a-vis Spanish from Spain. And this quote is very illustrative of the way Panhispanism operates. Rafael Altamira, one of the most renowned proponents, claims as follows: "We Spaniards cannot deny that the maintenance and development of our language, according to its own spirit in the nations that with it awakened to the life of modern civilization, is an indispensable basis for influence and intellectual intimacy." So again, the cultural link between Spain and its former colonies is used as a justification for retaining influence from the Iberian Peninsula over those former colonies that are now in a relationship of coloniality rather than colonialism vis-a-vis Spain. So this is how Pan-Hispanism looks in reality. It is a hierarchical structure that is nonetheless presented as a network of relationships. So the ensemble of Spanish language academies functions as a vertical institution that is nonetheless presented in institutional discourse as a horizontal type of brotherhood. And this is a highly functional paradox from an ideological perspective, because it is precisely the adoption of a horizontal type of speech that allows the Spanish language academies to still be managed and ruled at the end of the day from the Iberian Peninsula. And obviously, the members of Spanish language academies across the world realized about the real functioning of these Spanish language academies, and it was only a matter of time for them to protest and challenge this functioning. This happened most notably in 1951 on the occasion of the Conference of Spanish Language Academies, where, as you can see on the screen, Mexican writer Martin Luis Guzman called for a radical reform of the post-colonial relationship between all the Spanish language academies, highlighting the need for the American and Philippine academies to become fully autonomous, and thus exposing the fact that they were not autonomous from the Spanish language academy from Spain. Now, these disputes, these controversies, led to the creation of the so-called Association of Academies of the Spanish Language, in Spanish, Asociación de Academias de la Lengua Española, or ASALE for short. As you can see on the screen, the iconography of ASALE is rather interesting. So we have the representation of the crowns of Castile and Aragon, colonization, and the territory that was colonized. And surrounding all of these four vignettes, we have all the flags of the countries that are part of ASALE. And perhaps by chance, but probably not, right in the middle is the flag of Spain. And on top of that flag, there is a very powerful fire. Again, we saw in the previous chapter that the fire represents the ideal that the Spanish Royal Academy is pursuing, which is to purify language, to prescribe how language should be used worldwide. On top of this coat of arms, we can see an armory, which again represents the link between language and violence. And don't miss out on the motto, which is una estirpe, meaning one lineage, una lengua, meaning one language, and un destino, meaning one destiny. So the fact that the Spaniards imposed Spanish on these territories is now used as a justification of the further subjection of those territories to the cultural ruling of Spain. That is the ideological maneuver that is at stake here in the creation of the ASALE. Again, fascinating iconography. As I said, the 1951 incident was the first step towards the creation of the ASALE, and with that, the Spanish Royal Academy's rebranding at the end of the 20th century. And this transition is not so much a change in the essence, in the substance of the Spanish Royal Academy, as it is in the style, in the type of discourse that it adopts. So it transitions from a conservative, elitist, and Eurocentric image, not substance, but image, style, appearance, to an appearance that is now more open, more democratic, and above all, a new identity built around the notion of hispanophonia. So what exactly is hispanophonia, and how is it different from Panhispanism? So until a few years ago, there was this desire to, and I quote, keep the language pure and to protect it against contamination from foreign words and changes that might result from the language's internal evolution. Now, the academies, with a more practical and realistic orientation, have established as their common task the protection of the language's basic unity, which is ultimately what allows us to speak of a Spanish-speaking community, making the unity of the language compatible with the recognition of its internal variety and evolution. So what Asali is essentially saying here is we no longer have the aspiration of keeping Spanish as it is in Spain and apply that to Spanish all over the world. Now we accept the fact that Spanish is spoken and perhaps even written differently across the whole world, and our sole aim is to preserve something similar to a basic unity of the language, to preserve enough commonality through Spanish around the world so that we can claim the existence of one single language in spite of its rich variety of dialects. So at the end of the day, I think it's important to understand that hispanophonia is not radically different from Panhispanism. It is rather a change in appearance and discourse rather than a radical change in the substance, in the essence, in the underlying practices of the Spanish Language Royal Academy. Hispanophonia as a combination between the old Pan-Hispanism, though couched in a more friendly rhetoric, and entrepreneurial and political commitment. The existence of that quote-unquote common culture, which is actually an imposed culture, it is now used as a justification for striking deals between powerful multinationals and enterprises such as Telefónica, Planeta, etc., and to also have political arrangements between so-called Spanish-speaking countries. Here's a key quote from Antonio Papel, a big proponent of hispanophonia, which is, "It must be made very clear that hispanophonia is not about building the equivalent of the francophonie or the Commonwealth, in which the old metropolis play a hegemonic role. In the Spanish case, the relationship is not paternal filial, but fraternal." See again, the insistence on horizontality in discourse, which in turn disguises the practical existence of a hierarchical structure in function. One can think of hispanophonia just like we think about globalization. It looks like the picture on the left, which is the friendly, happy-go-lucky, happy flower embracement of all cultures worldwide. But in actuality, behind the scenes, it really functions like the picture on the right. It is a series of meetings between self-appointed elites, whether in the economic or in the political realm, that get to make decisions on behalf of the many people they supposedly represent and with barely any consent from them. So in conclusion, both Pan-Hispanism and hispanophonia are less the names of a supposed reality than paradigmatic examples of linguistic ideologies that are embraced and disseminated by and from the perspective of Spanish nationalists. The discursive articulation of these linguistic ideologies is premised on the activation of the supposed existence of a quote-unquote common homeland, which, as I explained, should be better referred as imposed homeland from Spain to the rest of the territories, which is what Spanish global colonization was, and shared by all these Spanish-speaking countries in order to exploit its market value. So you take a situation that is fundamentally violent and unfair, such as the Spanish colonization of these territories, and then you use that as precedent, and you say, given that we have a common culture, which is just the culture that I brought and imposed on your country, now we need to establish further economic and political collaboration agreements. So as you can see on the screen, this is done through the adoption of a number of neoliberal, neo-colonial policies that function for the benefit of state-sponsored institutions, i.e. the Spanish Royal Academy, i.e. the Cervantes Institute, and also Spanish multinational companies such as Telefónica, Endesa, BBVA, Grupo Santander, Prisa, and Planeta, rather than for the benefit of the people they claim to represent and in whose interest they claim to work. So I hope by now you have a more clear understanding of the way in which the linguistic ideologies of Pan-Hispanism and hispanofonía operate behind the scenes of so-called post-colonial Spanish. And as always, thanks for watching.